Welcome back to Mr. X Show. I hope you're all doing well tonight. My name is X, and I have a story for you. A story that was never meant to be told. A story that might make you question the people living just down the street from you. The neighbors who smile a little too wide. The ones who bring you food you never asked for. This story comes from a time when my family learned that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from strangers in the dark. Sometimes it comes from the house at the end of the block. Let's begin. It's hard for me to tell this story without feeling a heavy weight on my chest. But I need to get it out. I need someone to know what happened to us, what happened to my mother. When this all began, my family and I were living in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of town. We weren't rich, far from it actually. My father ran a modest corner store, the kind where locals bought bread, milk, and cigarettes. That was our only income, and there were 6 of us living off it. 6 mouths to feed, 6 lives depending on one tiny shop. You can imagine how tight things were. There were 4 of us kids, 2 brothers, 2 sisters. My brother and I, we knew early on that if we wanted anything in life, we'd have to earn it ourselves. So as soon as we were old enough to understand responsibility, we started tutoring younger kids in the neighborhood. We paid for our own school supplies, our own clothes, our own books. We didn't complain. That's just how it was. My mother, bless her soul, she did what she could to help. She was a seamstress. She'd take in work from neighbors, sewing dresses, hemming pants, adding lace to wedding gowns. Her hands were always busy, always stitching, always mending. And somehow, with all of us working, we managed. We lived humbly, but we lived with dignity. We had respect in that neighborhood, and honestly, most of the people around us were just like us, struggling, surviving. After my brother and I finished high school, we wanted to take over the family business completely. We wanted to lift the burden off our father's shoulders, but our parents wouldn't hear it. Finish college first, they'd say. Get your degrees, then you can do whatever you want. So we did. We studied, we graduated, and the moment we walked off that stage with our diplomas, we rolled up our sleeves and got to work. We took that little corner store and we expanded it. Slowly at first, then faster. We turned it into something bigger, a real shop, a place people wanted to visit. Our finances improved. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable, stable. And for the first time in years, my parents could breathe a little easier. But even with the extra money coming in, my mother never stopped sewing. She loved that work. It gave her purpose. And my father, he stayed involved too. He helped us at the shop, gave advice, kept us grounded. We were a team, a family. Eventually, we saved enough to do something we dreamed about for years. We tore down our old 2-bedroom house and built a new one. A real home, 2 stories, clean lines, fresh paint. It stood out in that neighborhood like a diamond in the dirt. People would walk by just to look at it. Some smiled, some didn't. Around that same time, a close friend of mine came by to congratulate us on the new house. He brought a gift, a tiny snow-white kitten with bright blue eyes. I fell in love with her immediately. We named her Millie. Millie adapted to our family so quickly, it's like she'd always been there. She was gentle, affectionate, playful. She brought so much joy into our home, especially to my mother. My mother had worked so hard her entire life. She'd fought through poverty, exhaustion, and worry. And now, finally, she had a beautiful home, a thriving family, a reason to smile. I remember watching her those first few weeks in the new house. She looked lighter somehow, happier, like she'd finally earned the peace she deserved. Neighbors came by to see the house. Most of them were kind. They complimented the design, admired the craftsmanship. But others, well, you could see it in their faces. Envy, resentment, the kind of bitterness that festers quietly and grows in the dark.
Now, I need to tell you about Aunt Martha. She wasn't really our aunt, not by blood anyway, but that's what everyone called her. She lived at the very end of our street. in a run-down house that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 50s. Aunt Martha was a large woman, tall, heavy-set, with long gray hair she always wore in a tight bun. She dressed in old-fashioned white sundresses that looked like they came from a thrift store in another era, and she wore thick, black-rimmed glasses that magnified her eyes in an unsettling way. When she laughed, it sounded like a storm rolling in, loud, harsh, and she always laughed with her mouth wide open, showing all her teeth. It was the kind of laugh that made you uncomfortable, even if you didn't know why. Aunt Martha didn't get along with anyone in the neighborhood. Not really. Her and her family were constantly fighting with someone. A dispute over a fence line, a complaint about noise, an argument over parking. It was always something. For years, our family was the only one she didn't have a problem with, and that was only because my mother never argued back. She just smiled, nodded, and kept her distance. Aunt Martha had 5 daughters. They were all grown, but they still lived at home, and they were just as difficult as their mother. They'd come to our house regularly, usually to have my mother do some sewing work for them, add lace to a dress, hem a skirt, repair a torn seam. My mother never turned them away, even though they were rude, demanding, and never seemed grateful. They'd make these passive-aggressive comments all the time. "Oh, you're so brave," they'd say. "Sew in 3 dresses in one day. I could never. My back just isn't strong enough." It sounded like a compliment, but it wasn't. My mother knew it. I knew it. They were testing her, pushing boundaries, seeing how much they could get away with. My mother had a sharp eye for people. She could read between the lines, and she knew that what they were really saying was, "We're going to stop bringing you work soon." They never said it outright, but the threat was always there, hovering in the air like smoke. Aunt Martha had this strange habit of asking overly personal questions. She'd phrase them in a way that made you pause, unsure how to respond. My mother would just stand there, caught off guard, trying to figure out the right answer. But she never snapped back. She never defended herself. She just endured it, because that's who she was. Patient, kind. After we built the new house, something changed. Aunt Martha and her daughters came by to see it, just like everyone else, but their reaction was different, cold. When they walked through the front door, it was like the air itself got heavier. They didn't say a word, not one compliment, not one kind remark. They just walked through the rooms, their eyes scanning every corner, every piece of furniture, every detail. I watched them closely, and I swear it looked like our happiness was physically painful to them. The joy on my mother's face, the pride in my father's eyes, it seemed to make them sick. You could see it in the way their mouths tightened, the way their shoulders tensed. They stayed for maybe 10 minutes, then they left. Without a word. Not long after that, my mother's health started to decline. She'd always been strong, tireless, but suddenly she was exhausted all the time. She'd complain of dizziness, weakness. She'd be sewing one moment, and the next she'd have to sit down and catch her breath. We told her to stop working so much, but she wouldn't listen. She hated being idle. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a holiday. We were all sitting together in the dining room, eating lunch. My mother was sitting directly across from me. I remember watching her as she ate. She looked tired but content. And then, without warning, her eyes began to close, slowly, like she was drifting off to sleep. And then she just collapsed. She slumped to the side, her head hitting the table. We panicked. I threw water on her face. My brother rubbed her hands, her arms. We shook her gently, calling her name. After what felt like an eternity, she came to, but she was weak, disoriented. She said she felt like someone was pushing her, like someone had shoved her from behind, but there was no one there. Millie, our little white kitten, had been nearby when it happened, and I'll never forget what she did.
She ran straight to my mother and climbed into her lap. She rested her tiny head on my mother's chest and just sat there, perfectly still, like she was trying to protect her. We were all so moved by it. Even in the midst of the fear, we marveled at how much that little creature loved her. My mother stroked Millie's head gently and whispered, "Good girl." But that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, my mother collapsed again and again and again, sometimes in the bathroom, sometimes while sewing, sometimes just walking across the room. We took her to doctors, specialists. They ran tests, gave her vitamins, prescribed medications. Nothing helped. The episodes kept happening, and each time my mother would say the same thing. "It feels like someone is pushing me."
One afternoon, I was home alone with my mother. Aunt Martha came by unannounced. She knocked on the door and I let her in. The moment she stepped inside, Millie's entire demeanor changed. The sweet, gentle kitten we knew vanished, and her place was something wild, feral. Millie arched her back. Her fur stood on end. She hissed and growled at Aunt Martha like she was staring down a predator. I'd never seen her act that way before. Never. She stood on her hind legs, claws out, ready to attack. Aunt Martha looked at my mother and said in that cold, cutting voice of hers, "What kind of wild animal are you keeping in this house? Get rid of it, now." My mother tried to calm Millie down, but it was no use. The kitten was fixated on Aunt Martha, trembling, snarling. I stood by the window watching the whole scene unfold. Aunt Martha had brought something with her, some kind of dessert she'd made. She set it down in the kitchen and sat for a few minutes, but Millie never stopped growling. Eventually, Aunt Martha got up and left, muttering under her breath about how rude we were. Before she walked out the door, she turned to my mother and said, "I made this sweet dish especially for you. Make sure you eat it. Let me know how it tastes." A little while later, my younger sister set the table for dinner, and there, in the center, was the dessert Aunt Martha had brought. A white, creamy pudding with cardamom sprinkled on top. It looked innocent enough. We all sat down to eat. Millie was sitting by my mother's feet. She was restless, agitated. She kept pacing back and forth, meowing softly, like she was trying to tell us something, but we didn't understand. My mother barely ate that night. She was too weak, too tired. But after she finished her meal, she reached for the dessert. She picked up the bowl, and the moment she did, Millie lunged. With all the strength in her tiny body, she leapt into the air and struck the bowl with her paw. The bowl flew out of my mother's hands and smashed into the wall. The pudding splattered everywhere. The plastic bowl bounced across the floor. We all froze. We stared at Millie in shock. What had just happened? My mother said quietly, "She did the same thing when Aunt Martha was here earlier. I don't know what's wrong with her." I tried to pick Millie up, but she wouldn't let me. She stayed right there, guarding the mess on the floor, her eyes locked on the pudding like it was something dangerous. My sister cleaned up the spill, and only then did Millie relax. She returned to her normal self, calm, gentle, sweet. We didn't understand what had happened, but deep down, I think we all felt it. Something was wrong.
That night, around 11, Aunt Martha came back. I told my mother not to mention that Millie had knocked over the dessert. "Just tell her you ate it," I said. "She's already angry enough." When Aunt Martha walked in, she looked directly at my mother with sharp, piercing eyes. "So," she said slowly, "how was the dessert?" My mother smiled weakly. "It was delicious. Thank you for going to so much trouble." "Oh, it was no trouble at all," Aunt Martha said, but there was something in her voice, something cold. "You did eat it, didn't you?" "Yes," my mother lied. "I did." Aunt Martha's expression didn't change, but I could see her mind working, calculating. She stayed for a few more minutes making small talk, and then she left. After she was gone, I looked at my mother and said, "I don't trust her." The very next morning, I went outside to leave for work. When I opened the front gate, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the ground, just inside the gate, was a large piece of raw meat. It had been thrown over the fence from the outside. I picked it up carefully.
The color was wrong. It was turning a sickly shade of blue-gray. My sister saw it and said immediately, "That's poison. Someone's trying to kill Millie." I didn't want to believe it, but I knew she was right. We threw the meat away immediately, but the realization hit us hard. Aunt Martha wasn't just jealous. She wasn't just petty. She was dangerous.
That evening, Aunt Martha came by again. My sister, wearing a headscarf, met her at the door. "We're about to leave," she said quickly. "Maybe come back later." Aunt Martha smiled thinly. "How's that little cat of yours? Has her temper improved?" My sister gave a vague answer and shut the door. We were done pretending. Later that night, I was at the shop when my sister called me, her voice shaking. "Mom fell! Come home, now!" I ran. When I got there, my mother was on the floor. She'd broken her leg. My sister said, "She swears someone pushed her from behind, but no one was there." We were all in my mother's room that night, trying to comfort her, when we heard a strange sound from the hallway. A scratching, a thrashing. I went to check. What I saw made my stomach drop. Millie was tangled in a large, blood-stained cloth. It had appeared out of nowhere. The blood was fresh, wet. Millie was struggling, panicking, trying to free herself. We pulled the cloth off her. She was terrified, shaking, hiding her face. My father said, "Don't throw that away. Take it to a scholar, someone who understands these things." We did, and that's when we learned the truth. My mother had been cursed. Black magic, dark, deliberate, evil. The scholar told us, "Your mother's prayers are the only thing keeping her alive. And that cat, she's taking the curses onto herself. She's protecting your mother, but she won't survive much longer." He looked at us with grave eyes and said, "You need to leave this house now." We started looking for a new place immediately. We found one within a week, a rental across town, far away from Aunt Martha, far away from that cursed street. The day we were supposed to move, Millie disappeared. We searched everywhere, called her name, checked every room. Nothing. And then I looked under my mother's bed. There she was, Millie, lying perfectly still, dead. We all cried that day. My mother sobbed. She held Millie's little body and whispered, "You saved me. You saved me." Even in death, Millie had stayed by her side, loyal to the very end. We moved out that same day. We left that house, that street, that neighborhood behind. And slowly, my mother began to recover. Her strength returned. The fainting stopped. The invisible hands that had been pushing her, they were gone. But I never forgot Millie, that brave, tiny creature who loved my mother so much she gave her own life to protect her.
To this day, I can't walk past a white cat without thinking of her, and I can't help but wonder, what would have happened if Millie hadn't been there? What if we hadn't moved? What if my mother had eaten that dessert? Some neighbors smile and wave. Some bring you gifts, and some bring you poison wrapped in kindness. This is X, and this is a story I'll never forget. Thank you for listening. And please, if you have pets, listen to them. They see things we don't. Good night.